and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you all to this, our last meeting before the summer break. Shortly introduce you to our speaker, and the format will be that we'll have the speaker presentation with Q&A following the presentation. If you get any questions, please put them into the chat function, and we'll come back to these at the end. And then following the speaker, we'll go into the branch business. So Kenny is our speaker today, Kenny Brown from Police Scotland. Kenny is well known to many of you. He's a committee member and chartered fellow. I have spent a lot of time from being police officer, a lot of the time there spent at Glasgow Airport and the experience built up there. Then working at Glasgow Airport in health and safety before moving back to Police Scotland in a health and safety role. And he's here to talk to us today about the health and safety aspects of policing COP26. It was in Glasgow. So Kenny, if you would share your presentation with us, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Kenny Brown, and my own background is time-served toolmaker in 31 years within policing, then an 11-year career as a health and safety manager, and finally back in policing as part of the health and safety team looking after COP26. I'm also a member of the West of Scotland Committee, and I hope you find this presentation this afternoon interesting. By way of background, historically, the Health and Safety at Work Act didn't apply to police officers. Their status was as legally appointed constables and not employees. Each was responsible for their behaviour, following the discipline code and the courts. And it was not until 1999 that legislation was passed granting the same rights to constables as enjoyed by other workers. And this, in effect, made constables employees as far as health and safety was concerned. The purpose of the police is to guard, watch and patrol to prevent crime, protect life and property, and where crime has occurred, to detect and apprehend offenders. So the Chief Constable and his management team may have to send officers and staff into dangerous situations and circumstances where most of us would be asking our employees to move away from the danger. The Health and Safety Executive and Chief Police Officers met and worked out a framework by which the police service would be measured. The factors that they included would be that there's often an unrealistic public expectation that officers and staff will routinely put themselves at risk to protect the public, that they have to take account the wider purpose of the police service, including public safety and the legal framework in which they operate, and cannot act solely to protect their own officers and staff. In fighting crime, the police in effect reduce the overall risk to the members of the public, but in doing so may create other risks. Many incidents they face occur without warning, and individual officers may from time to time be confronted with situations well outside their experience and training. Police officers may need to take actions which put the public and themselves into danger, whereas it's justifiable in terms of the wider benefits. Some of the incidents they deal with develop and change at speed, and we have to prepare individual officers and staff to take tough and complex decisions in foreseeable situations that may be dangerous, fast-moving, emotionally charged and pressurised, even if there is incomplete and inaccurate information about the incident. The HSE will look at the entire circumstances of the event and take these into consideration when looking at suitable enforcement actions. This might explain the situation you might have seen in the police camera action type situations, where a police pursuit is stopped by either the person in charge of the pursuit, which is not one of the drivers involved, or his area control room, on the basis of that the danger to continue this to both the officers and others becomes unacceptable, and that would be others in this circumstances would be the members of the public who may be affected by this. Of course, if there was a fatality, then these would be investigated by the Independent Police Investigation and Review Commission. So COP26. This is the United Nations Climate Change Conference, which are annual events organised by the UN with invitations sent to 193 world leaders, including government representatives, negotiators, businesses and citizens coming together for 12 days of talks, and they agree and monitor actions on man-made climate change. The 26th Conference of the Parties, COP, took place in Glasgow from October 31st to the 12th of November 2021 on an island site at the Scottish Event Campus. There were two zones, one the blue zone where the official negotiations took place, which was actually designated as United Nations territory and subject to international law, and the green zone, which was allowed access to the general public and other guests for exhibitions, events, demonstrations of technology and performances for everyone to attend. Police Scotland's got a long history of policing major events, from the Commonwealth Games and the European Championships to the G8 and state visits. We therefore had a bank of knowledge from which to draw. This was a UK government-led event in cooperation with the Scottish Government. As you can imagine, it touched upon all the services provided by both organisations, with Transport Scotland heavily involved in the logistics of getting the public to and from the venue. If you can imagine the resources that it takes to deal with one royal visit, can you imagine what it was to provide security for all the VIPs and VVIPs who attended the event? The purpose of the presentation today is to outline some of the health and safety challenges which face Police Scotland as we ramped up for this event. The name of the operation, we always name an operation, was given as URM, which in Gaelic means respect, esteem, reverence, deference, worship, honour and dignity. URM sounds a whole lot shorter. Health, safety and welfare were integral parts of the planning. We were bringing 7,000 additional officers to Scotland. How would they get here? What skills did we need from them? Where would they stay? How do we get them to where we need them? And who will be responsible for them while they're here? A strategic risk register was created with all the risks you might expect. IT, comms, procurement, logistics, the establishment of a comms strategy, hire vehicles and alternatives, ensuring officers suitably trained over the period and that any authorisations they may have would not expire during that period. We had mass arrest concerns, also aviation risks in terms of drones and helicopters, and the impact of COVID-19 on the supply chain for equipment, but also on our own staff. We had hotel identification to carry out and selection, funding concerns, and potential changes in the terrorism threat, and finally, even severe weather. Well, it was happening in Scotland after all. As you can imagine, there were some strategic objectives. Some of these concern safety, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but essentially, the first one is to maximise the safety of the conference delegates and the heads of state. The second was of all the other attendees to the conference and those who were associated. And finally, the safety of the wider public and minimise public disorder. Right down at number 11 was to ensure the health, safety and well-being of police personnel on the event, taking cognizance of the unique operational demands of COP26. Objective 11 is the one I'll concentrate mainly on today. The detail behind this included appropriate shift patterns being developed to balance the need for the significant mutual aid with the operational demands of the event and with the well-being needs of officers. There are considerable regulations covering shift patterns and the amount of notice required to amend or change these. And while the UK were meeting the costs, this has to be done in a way which was as cost-effective as possible without running roughshod over long-standing agreements. The officers deployed would be deployed in uniforms suitable for the prevailing weather conditions. Those who required to reside away from home would be provided accommodation of an appropriate standard, which would include ensuite facilities, suitable heating, meals and communal space. More on this later. The officers deployed would be provided with refreshments during each deployment, and we had some interesting heat in the box meals and some natty curries, which were really nice. All officers deployed would be provided with refreshments during the deployment and the suitable PPE for the prevailing COVID-19 pandemic, and in conjunction with the local health authorities, ensure the health, safety and welfare of officers affected by the virus. We did have a few officers travelled to Scotland with the virus in vehicles, and there was a number of teams who were completely self-isolating for some or part of the event. We'll touch on more on these as we go through. As health and safety professionals, we would be more familiar with the terminology we use to give advice on our clients or employers. So we use this as a structure of the talk today. The first is effective health and safety management, which I've already touched on, but the employer has responsibilities briefly as follows, which we'll all be familiar with. Let's look first at competent staff. The obligation for the employer for policing is no different from any other undertaking. So we have a health and safety manager, deputy manager, and a team of health and safety advisors across Scotland. We have the policies and procedures that you would expect. We have a West of Scotland chartered member, James Bertram, is a health and safety manager for both Police Scotland and the SPA, the Scottish Police Authority, who is our oversight body. We have an assistant manager, 10 advisors spread across Scotland, and we have a safety admin assistant who looks after our paperwork. For COP26, the health and safety team was expanded by 2 posts, and I was tempted from retirement to return to Police Scotland for the 18 months. Each of the advisors has at least 1 geographical division and a department to service along with other projects and specialisms. We have a training working group and represented on most working parties throughout the force. We're on project boards and committees at appropriate level. We are there to nudge towards safer alternatives, and each advisor produces a quarterly report with analysis and comparisons to their own divisions or heads of departments. There are structures from divisional committees to area committees in the north, west and the east of Scotland, with a health and safety board led by the Deputy Chief Constable, Fiona Taylor. The health and safety manager also services the needs of the SPA directors in providing them with comprehensible information. The overall control of the event was ACC Bernie Higgins with a planning team, which then saw the detail of the event. 2 health and safety advisors were part of this planning team, and other advisors were increasingly drawn in through the event to be able to give advice on the evidence available. For the days of the event, everyone was involved. The operational control in the health and safety team was provided by a multi-agency control centre known as the MACC, where senior officers in a range of organisations had an overview of all incidents and activities and had CCTV with air support live streaming events to the ground. We had health and safety advisors in the control room who could request other advisors to attend any incident scene as an advisor to the local commander. This is a picture of an event. The bronze commander is wearing an amber police hat, his public order tactical advisor in the blue police hat, and yours truly in the unmarked hat. You may see red, yellow and green police hats and flashes on occasions. Green hats and flashes are worn by the public order first aiders to deal with injured officers in any major disorder where ambulance officers might not be able to attend. I attended an event outside Ibrox Park where all 4 police officers were first aiders in green hats, which prompted a few comments from the Rangers fans. In terms of communication, the National Airwaves Communication System allows any terminal to connect to a particular talk group or channel. So this allowed the visitors to use their own equipment, and other specialists such as firearms officers were largely in the same situation. So we had effective communications throughout. But there are local variations. The policing by consent model is essentially standard across the country. This allows flexibility in deployment from one force to another. There's even a national coordination centre specifically for that purpose. Every force has a team of public trained officers. They use the same tactics, they have the same equipment and can operate anywhere in the UK. They travel in public order vehicles, so you may have seen a variety of police vehicle markings over that period. Testing and exercising was important, and one such exercise was for a terrorist attack, and the video I'm about to show is outwardly for the armed policing and shows some footage of a national counter-terrorism operation based at the Scottish Fire and Rescue campus in Cambuslang. The scenario was a road crash, then a bladed weapon attack, which then escalated to firearms. This was a multi-agency exercise with civilian and military assets over a period of days. And in this, you will recognise the police firearm officers, but look closely and you'll see some of them are wearing green. These are actually tactical ambulance officers working in a warm zone. There are also staff in maroon kit who are actually fire service personnel. One of the purposes of this exercise was to ensure that the normal government involvement processes takes account of the devolved administration, and the Lord Advocate of Scotland is included in the consultation process. I had the role of being the health and safety advisor for that event and responsible for ensuring the appropriate risk assessments were in place. It was a very impressive exercise, and for obvious reasons, this clip is not showing any of the military involvement. Have a look at the footage at the rear.
Hello, I'm Superintendent Stuart Mackey, Head of Armed Policing for Police Scotland. An authorised firearms officer is like every other police officer, but has additional training to protect the public. Firearms officers have a number of specialist skills ranging from enhanced first aid, conflict resolution and weapons handling, and obviously dealing with subjects who present a real threat and risk to officers or other members of the public. Authorised firearms officers are deployed across Scotland on a 24-hour basis. In general terms, they carry out routine patrols the same as any other police officer. However, when they're called upon and authorised by the control room inspector, they can then deploy to firearms and other threat to life incidents. Throughout the year, firearms officers have regular training events, but in addition to that, for COP26, we've engaged with multi-agency partners to carry out joint training exercises in advance of the deployment. During COP26, firearms officers will be deployed to carry out protection duties for world leaders, delegates who are attending it, and also the general public who will be attending in the area of the conference.
There's a national register of competencies. However, the challenge was to ensure for example, the 3 specialist officers we have available for event are not in the reality one officer with 3 different specialisms. So if they're engaged in one role, the other roles you theoretically have access to would not be available. Where the staff required to comply with a safe system of work were not available, or there were shortfalls such as first aid at work trained officers available for each venue, then measures were extended to ensure that trained people would be available, for example, at staging posts as well as venues across the various shifts which would need to be covered. Other specialisms could be in high demand, such as officers to release protesters from specially constructed lock-on devices designed to delay their removal by pipes and handcuffs. So let me show you another short clip of that specialism. I can say that for a long period of time within the Force Training Centre, there was a yacht to allow practice, and this yacht was there for a specific purpose.
Hello, I'm Inspector Robert Patterson. For COP26, I'll be a Public Order Bronze Commander. So protester removal teams that are deployed in circumstances where the person who is within that protest is either unable to self-release or we need specialist capability to ensure that we can remove those protesters safely from that seat of protest. Obviously, we have to consider the rights of the protester under terms of Articles 9, 10 and 11 of the Human Rights Act, but that has to be balanced against the needs of the community and their own human rights. Police will give the protester every opportunity to self-release before we take action. Part of that process is a mediation process, and we call that the 5-step appeal. So the 5-step appeal starts off with a simple appeal to the protesters, and we would actually ask them to self-release. Are they able to self-release, and are they willing to self-release? We then, if necessary, move on to steps 2, 3, 4, and if we have to move on to step 5, then the police would take action and actually remove them from the seat of protest.
Hello, I'm Constable Keith Jackson, and I will be involved in the public order operation for COP26. It takes time because safety is paramount in everything that we do in protester removal. We have to ensure that we work in a safe and sterile environment. We have to ensure that the protesters are as safe as possible, and we have to ensure that our officers are as safe as possible. This can take time due to the complexity of the environments that we're working in, due to possibly the height that we're working at, or the level of complexity of the devices that the protesters have attached themselves to. It may seem heavy-handed when we are required to use 2, 3, 4 officers to lift a single person, but everything we do is aimed towards the safety of the protester so that we don't harm them. If that takes more officers to lift them, then that's what we will do.
If you see a protester having been physically removed by the police, please be aware that every step has been taken to make sure that that protester has had the opportunity to either self-release or move away from the seat of protest by themselves prior to any police action having been taken.
The challenge of policing means that many of the control measures available to you as employers are simply not available to the police. We largely work in uncontrolled environments, so we can't specify the ground or the lighting conditions, but can provide appropriate footwear and torches. We can't control the weather, but we have to ensure the correct PPE. We may have to deal with violent people intent on assaulting the officers or others, so use de-escalation techniques, open-handed tactics to PAVA, which is the new version of CS spray, or physically baton and handcuffs. Spit hoods and leg restraints are carried in every vehicle. As you can imagine, the training and authorisation of this equipment is fully documented. For other risks, we have fire officers using taser or more lethal tactics. The officer has to justify each of their actions in court if necessary. In terms of safe equipment and plant machinery, equipment is only issued after assessment, trials and consultation with union and staff associations. There was little specifically issued for COP26, which was not part of the general kit. Vehicles are an obvious example. Police Scotland has supplemented our fleet by hiring cars for the event and operating an emergency repair service for visitors' vehicles. One Force's minibus arrived with a hole in the floor, and it was evident that some forces don't enjoy as modern a fleet as we have in Police Scotland. Motorcycle units from all over the UK and attended and carried out the escorts for the VIPs and VVIPs who were housed across the Central Belt. Again, using standard system and equipment. Only one motorcyclist fell off during the event, and thankfully he wasn't injured. As this was a COP26, we acquired 6 top-of-the-range electric bikes from Harley-Davidson, some of the VIP escorts you may see in subsequent films. With 3,500 vehicles, we operate the single biggest fleet in the public sector in Scotland and the second biggest police fleet in the UK. In November 2019, Police Scotland published its fleet strategy, setting out its ambition to operate an ultra-low emission vehicle fleet by 2030. Over the next 10 years, we will gradually replace all our current internal combustion engines, both petrol and diesel, with ultra-low or zero emission vehicles, starting with our unmarked vehicles, then moving to marked vehicles much later in the process. In order to achieve this, we'll install an electric vehicle infrastructure to support all our electric fleet, which will be implemented over 3 phases covering 200 sites across the country, including city centre, rural and even island locations. By the end of 21-22, we had 750 electric vehicles, which represent 50% of our unmarked fleet, transitioned from petrol or diesel, which will continue to reduce our carbon emissions from our fleet. This brings up its own issues in terms of trailing leads, hanging out windows of police offices, and we're dealing with these as we go through. Of course, police service has always been innovative, and this slide shows a BBC News page of police using a plug-in electric scooter. This was back in 2008, and if you think the name of the officer looks familiar, yes, that's me. I can't resist anything on two wheels. In terms of safe premises, we have a massive property portfolio across Scotland. Most are police owned and we have the occupier's liability. However, we rent accommodation in some shared premises such as community, fire stations or town halls. We also have subtenants in some of our buildings. The roads policing officers, which form part of one division, will occupy space in a number of police stations across Scotland. The Criminal Justice Services Division, or Custody Division, is itself a standalone division, but has cells and prisoner accommodation throughout Scotland. The local health and safety committees will ensure that tenants like these are included in local consultation. We have risk assessments every 3 years. Apologies. We have fire risk assessments every 3 years or annually for our custody centres, and these are generated by specialist risk assessors nominated by our hard services contractor, which is currently Atland Servest. This contractor also looks after our asbestos registers, the planned preventive and maintenance of equipment in each of the premises. This may be air conditioning, heating in each of the office premises, to fire doors or vehicle lifts and LED systems in vehicle workshops. For each of our premises, we have a 6-monthly inspection process where the unions, staff associations, estates, divisional staff, and the health and safety advisor for that area meet and tour the premises, providing an action plan which is then overseen by the local health and safety committees. The COP26 challenge with each of the venues was in effect a place of work for our officers. When the architect and designer planned a hotel, they gave no thought that one day a police sniper would be located in the roof. So the safety observations submitted in this case highlighted that no line of sight with other snipers was possible, and the noise from an air conditioning unit meant that the officers needed hearing protection, which then made communications difficult. This is not ideal if you need to shoot someone. There was potential Legionella risk with the officers breathing in airborne water droplets over the extended COP26 period. These issues were all addressed, but it just gives an idea of how unusual ensuring a safe place of work in policing terms can be. Hired coaches would protect officers who would be transported in plain clothes from the accommodation to staging posts. One I was involved in was the Royal Highland Showground. We'd obtained permission to erect temporary structures for storing equipment and provided changing rooms. The coaches would drop off the officers who would change into uniform, collect their A-wave terminals, charge batteries, PAVA and body armour, then travel to their allotted duty in their own police public order vehicles. When they stood down, to return to the staging post and repeat the process in reverse. Police Scotland provided an officer to each visitor's vehicle to provide local knowledge and procedures so that there was a consistent application of Police Scotland policies and values across the event. The officers' accommodation had to be taken into consideration, and in my early days in the police, places such as church halls would be nominated for officers to bed down on camp beds, but now single room accommodation in hotels is the expectation, particularly on any planned event. This was also important as a COVID protection measure. The policy specified en suite where possible, and this meant competing with the other COP26 visitors and officials who were also booking whatever accommodation was available. Point to bear in mind that where this standard was not met, then the officers are entitled to a hardship payment. Some of the hotels had closed for COVID-19 and had only opened specially for this event. Were some hotels tired? Absolutely. Half of the complaints related to one Glasgow city centre hotel about heating. An advisor found this was an exaggeration with other heating sources available. In one case, an Ayrshire hotel was quoted to be in a shocking state, filthy with broken windows. We asked for pictures and were sent 3. One had a broken window in a conservatory. The second wasn't clear, but we worked out it was a close-up of a cobweb, and the third photograph was of a spider. There was no evidence to suggest that this was the source of the cobweb in picture number 2. No hardship payment here then. However, on the other hand, one senior officer awoke to find a rat in his room, and the manager, who was also the chef, turned up in his whites to deal with this. In some cases, officers had to share a room, which then attracted the additional compensatory payment, so everyone was happy. One officer complained that his accommodation was too good, and he asked if there was any alternative which he could use, which would then allow him to claim the allowance. No. Some of the premises were geared up to cater for weddings and prestige events, so those at Ayr Racecourse, Hamilton Racecourse, Hampden Park, and hotels such as Houston House were royally looked after, with white tablecloths and silver service. No compensatory payment for them. The COVID restrictions allowed us to take over entire hotels, but even then there were private members of the hotel's leisure club, and we had to maintain access to the gym and pool regardless. So security of these venues was important, and I believe there were lots of entries on TripAdvisor. Some venues were transport related, so the demand on transport was high, with river restrictions at the island site. Air exclusion zones for both aircraft and drones were in place, and for some venues, simply the number of movements of the VVIPs to and from the venue was definitely an issue, with lowering levels of staff due to the pandemic. The normal protections at airports took account of the attractiveness of these venues to both protesters and terrorists, as these are iconic targets with flag-carrying aircraft and part of the critical national infrastructure. One health and safety advisors was sent to George Square in Glasgow, where a large inflatable cow was filled with helium and technically fell into the devices excluded. This required a balance of the protesters' right to demonstrate and the technical infringement. I can confirm that the cow continued to fly that day without incident. I believe concern was raised about a large green helicopter with Hereford licence plates being parked at the parade ground of Tullyallen Castle, the Police Scotland headquarters. What if it takes off and breaks our windows? They asked. We need a risk assessment, they cried. The advisor asked, did it break any windows when it landed? And we suggested that they personally take it up with those rough-looking people in the green, but I think they declined that suggestion. Safe premises was a concern, so prisoner transport was our consideration. You may recall the demonstration in London with Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain. There was an expectation that we would see major demonstrations in Scotland, given the world leaders expected to attend. It was interesting that some of the demonstrators' organisers had bail conditions imposed, preventing them from taking part in any other events in London. However, the separate Scottish legal system, those bail conditions would not apply. There was the expectation that potentially they would all come to Scotland. There was also intelligence gathering to identify and mitigate any planned criminality. Mass arrests to clog up the justice system was expected and was a major consideration. What's that old adage? Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Our policy there was that designated prisoner transport would be used, and we would not be placing prisoners into saloon cars, but use bespoke cell vans, which had cages and was safe not only for the person under arrest, but for the officer. Custody and detention facilities have largely been centralised to provide both the medical care and close supervision necessary to detain people who may be in crisis, who may have underlying health conditions or be under the influence of substances. It sounds simple, but we had temporary custody centres established across the Central Belt, where each had replicated the normal reception and cell facilities needed to the current Home Office standards in case there were to be mass arrests. Each of these had the same standard of fire alarm, CCTV, access to IT systems, and the same level of security. These had ramps to avoid steps and adequate lighting, heating, and emergency call points for violent events. These were staffed by officers as part of the Criminal Justice and Services Division who were used to dealing with detainees. The person in the picture is Blair Liddle, one of the IOSH West of Scotland graduate members. Specific risk assessments were created, including one for multiple occupation of cells and even where a prisoner has elected to identify as a different gender. The specification and layout of these merited decisions in detail, and these were monitored by health and safety advisors during construction, delivery, and erection. Some, such as Baird Street Police Station in Glasgow, had to be lifted into position by tower crane, and each health and safety team supervised these operations, ensuring that competent contractors were involved and that each of these centres were visited by a health and safety advisor. I looked after the Edinburgh-based centres in St Leonard's and Craigmillar. None of these extra services were used to hold COP26 detainees. We planned for the worst, which paid off. Police Scotland have formal relations with Unite, Unison, and the Scottish Police Federation, and also the Association of Scottish Police Superintendents. The Federation and the unions have full-time health and safety officials who attend meetings at senior level and local representatives to attend local meetings. It's normal for them to carry out investigations on accidents and raise any issues of concern. So those bodies were included in the COP26 planning team and were very active on the ground through the event. There were separate risk assessments for COVID-19 in all of the venues with COVID marshals in place, risk assessments such as the approved COP26 procession, the COP26 event itself, and then assessment for detention and accommodation. These were generally a separate risk assessment at each venue. Additionally, risk assessments for each of the operational specialists such as dogs, mounted unit, aviation security unit, and each of the 15 staging posts had a separate risk assessment. Some, such as the island site, had included the risk of working near water, so the Glasgow Humane Society officer, normally involved in river rescue, was involved in assuring additional lifebelts were in place at the island site. Police Scotland has a SCOPE system, which is an in-house data collection system. Police Scotland staff will use this to record a range of issues, accidents, record their use of force, as well as any annual leave and sickness. Each advisor will examine, assess, and code these events, which is presented in a Power BI database to provide accurate management information. It wasn't possible to include the 7,000 visitors on mutual aid onto this system, so a paper-based system was used to record the visitors' events. There were remarkably little injuries from our own staff and very low numbers, under 20, from the visitors. The most common injury was stepping out of a vehicle and twisting ankles, a few slip, trip, fall events, and one of our own motorcyclists on a 6-week-old bike fell from a motorcycle after striking a black object on the motorway in the dark. Thankfully, his injuries were minor. One visiting dog branch officer was bitten by our own dog, and one officer on a rest day in an Edinburgh bar fell from a stool suffering a head injury. Of those locations with specific security gates installed, then these were erected and operated by contractors. However, at one venue at Hamilton Racecourse, we did record an injury from a police officer who pulled a gate over their own foot. This was far less than expected and a tribute to the planning and the organisation of the event. There was a communication strategy with a dedicated intranet site with monthly newsletter and details of the various meetings and action plans. For any event, the following outcomes are possible. Optimum, everything went well, no one was injured. Acceptable, short-lived disruption, moderate number of arrests for public order or other offences. For unacceptable, widespread or uncontrolled public disorder, injury or loss of life. Thankfully, we only had the optimum as a result in all of the incidents we took place. The level of threat for the VVIP was such that the period of consideration, as we heard in the earlier video, that the police are obliged to give to the magnitude of the protesters' right to lie in front of the US President's vehicle may have been a very short period of time. There was a series of briefings to meet the obligations to provide information, instruction and training, and these ranged from the internet site to video briefings, a general package for everyone involved, then a specific venue package, and finally a role-specific package. So these included the UN passes to the blue zone where required, and specific COP26 vehicle passes for the staging posts. Everyone had to complete an online briefing before deployment, and there were a series of local and major debriefs in place to gather the evidence of how it went. Business as usual had to continue though, and so there was a series of BAU exercises to check that the remaining level of staff would be sufficient to cope with routine and then unexpected without lowering the standards of service. So every division did this based on the anticipated numbers which would be available, taking into account the losses due to COVID self-isolation or abstraction for COP26. We had cancelled some leave and had allowed the officers and staff to carry over a higher number of annual leave into the following year's period to smooth out this peak demand. The event also straddled November the 5th fireworks event, with normally large-scale organised fireworks events being cancelled due to coronavirus, but a number of unauthorised spontaneous events taking place. This had isolated incidents of disorder, with in one case rockets fired at police officers, but no injuries recorded. Each of the accommodation had suitable space for changing and relaxation. There were suitable dining facilities for hot meals, officers had suitable clothing and equipment, and replacements were available. The extraordinary demands would see 10,000 officers deployed each day, so a bespoke workforce agreement was agreed between the staff unions, the Police Federation and employers to ensure sufficient staff would be available. The welfare arrangements weren't restricted to humans. The welfare of dogs and horses was included in the arrangements to ensure appropriate accommodation, rest and exercise periods were available, and avoiding remaining in vehicles for any extended period. A dedicated well-being team was formed involving newsletters, and they visited the various venues and accommodation with the health and safety and representatives. The Police Federation representatives were also active in speaking to their members on how they're being looked after. In summary, this could have been major disruption across the Central Belt, but the old adage of get there early and in sufficient numbers proved to ensure that there were adequate resources to deal with both the expected and the unexpected. History will judge the success of COP26 in light of the agreements made and the climate change achievements. However, the policing of the operation proved to be safe and enjoyable for the vast majority, with a very small number of arrests. For me, it was a fantastic opportunity to be part of the event, however minor, and to see firsthand the work by the many people to achieve this. I was proud of my team, and Police Scotland now have an even bigger library of experience to share with others planning similar events. I was thinking about how best to summarise this, but I'll leave this to the Chief Constable Ian Livingston. I'm happy to take any questions thereafter.
As Chief Constable of the Police Service of Scotland, I want to thank everyone who played their part to ensure a safe and secure COP26 climate conference. The people of Glasgow, the people of Scotland, welcomed world and business leaders, delegates, climate activists and citizens. And we know COP26 also brought inevitable disruption and inconvenience. Crucially, the conference was able to consider the important issue of climate change without any disruption. The vast majority of those who made their voices heard did so peacefully and lawfully. Huge marches and rallies took place, largely without incident. Young people powerfully demonstrated their commitment to tackling climate change, including the children of some officers and staff. Officers from right across Scotland and all other United Kingdom police services supported one of the largest policing operations ever undertaken in the UK. For many months before the conference began, we engaged with the United Nations, the UK and Scottish governments, Glasgow City Council, the Scottish Police Authority and many other key agencies, as well as protesters and an independent advisory group. This allowed productive conversations to explain our approach to policing COP26 and challenge and inform our thinking. We consistently demonstrated our commitment to upholding people's rights and to enabling them to make their voices heard with a friendly and welcoming tone, underpinned by the core values of Police Scotland: integrity, fairness, respect. We had hundreds of engagements with protest groups during the conference period. Proportionate containment or enforcement to ensure safety and lawfulness was necessary on a very small number of occasions. There was no significant violence, no significant disorder or damage, and relatively few arrests. This is great tribute and credit to campaigners and activists, the general public, and to all the officers and staff who worked constructively to ensure demonstrations could be conducted safely while minimising the disruption to communities. Of equal importance, people right across the country continued to be provided with the effective policing service they need and deserve throughout the conference period. Working with and for the public goes right to the heart of policing in Scotland. I am deeply grateful for the support and cooperation our fellow citizens demonstrated during this major international event. Thank you.
And on a personal note, I managed to get a shot in the new electric bike. Thank you very much. Can I pass it back to Anthony, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. Anthony, I hope that's okay. I'll just close this down and I'll leave the meeting. Thank you. Stop recording.